I'm very excited. I'm very excited about Hospitality Hawaii with Jon Conching. And one of the reasons I'm excited is this is really his show. Going forward, you're going to see more of him. You're going to see Jon acting as host and bringing guests in from all over the hospitality and tourism industry. And he has been all over it for a lifetime as an executive, as a manager, as a consultant. Hi, Jon. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jay. I'm excited to be part of it, and I look forward to bringing in more guests and speakers to share insights, recommendations of what's going on in our hospitality business, how we reopen successfully, and how we maintain that going into the ending of 2021 and into 22 and 23. So thank you for having me.
You know, I first started doing these panel programs in the 90s, and the one that sticks in my brain, which was very successful, was called, for the Building Owners and Managers Association in Waikiki, it was called Waikiki, the engine of our economy. Whither thou goest, Waikiki, and whither was spelled twice, you know, whither and whither. Whither thou goest, Waikiki, the engine of our economy. It's Shakespearean, don't you think? And you know, the whole point.
Well, still relevant, right?
Still relevant. Yeah, still the point. So we can't forget that. I mean, this state is really dependent, not only Waikiki, but the whole state is dependent on the hotel industry. And that's why, you know, the pandemic has been so devastating for so many people and so many business people, so many investors over the past year. So we titled the show here today, Hawaiian Hospitality into Reopening, because I think we are in the process of that. And we have to watch it because this is not something you can be complacent about. You have to watch it every day. So, Jon, can you give us a handle on where we are in the continuum? You know, what has happened in the time of COVID? What damage has been done by COVID to the hospitality economy? And where we are in the continuum of returning to a more normal kind of hospitality economy?
Well, that's a lot to talk about, and I think we've all heard a year's worth of information, you know, starting from maybe as early as December of 19, but then it hit its peak somewhere around February, March of 2020. Hotels started closing, airlines started reducing, you know, their flight schedules from January, February, March. And then lo and behold, sometime in late March, early April, there were literally no flights coming into the islands except for maybe some of the government flights and some of the cargo flights that needed to come in. So obviously unprecedented, you know, tens and thousands of workers, whether you work directly in the hospitality industry, visitor industry, or were connected in some form or shape. That's because your livelihood depended on visitors coming out to the different parts of the islands and shopping at your small retail store, going to the island snow, shave ice store down in Kailua, etc. So it had obviously long-reaching impacts. And I'll speak from experience, you know, having gone through it, having met with our owners at Turtle Bay, where I was most recently until this past September. It was March 4th. We actually had our last meeting with our owners and our management company. We're kind of planning strategies of how to reduce expenses and maximize our revenues as we work through it. And then lo and behold, a week later or a week and a half later, we're told it looks like you may close. And then the hotel closed on March 27th. But myself, like I think most everyone involved in the industry and in the state felt that you'd be back at work sometime in June. You know, no one anticipated that it would get worse and worse and worse, and it'd be a year before people get back to work.
Yeah.
Hey, but fast forward, here we are, as reported by the Hawaii Tourism Authority, Department of Transportation. Last Saturday, March 13th, was a pretty impressive day for arrivals. You know, one figure shows 26,000 people, including all the neighbor island visitors. Hawaii Tourism Authority reports almost 19,000 trans-Pacific visitors coming in. nearly 8, 9, 10,000 more than came on an average day in February. So we're clearly heading in the right direction.
Yeah, impressive. And the funny thing is that COVID still exists and is still threatening in many states on the mainland, some of whom have not really managed it very well. But if they see that Hawaii is safe, if they feel that the brand now includes a safety factor, if you will, they're going to be quicker to come here. They're going to try to escape the problems wherever they are and come to a place where hopefully there aren't so many problems, and take advantage of the brand that we built before, from way back when, a brand about good weather and good food and good people and all that aloha. And so I think we're running on that kind of expectation now.
Yeah, it's clearly happening, right? And so it doesn't happen by itself. So Hawaiian Airlines has been tremendous, right? I mean, as well as Southwest and Alaska Airlines and all the other major carriers. But Hawaiian has pretty much stood their ground. And, they've held a lot of flights. They're constantly sharing information of what flights are coming up, what new routes are being added to the mix, where they're cutting back. And so while the demand is growing, you have to have the seats. You definitely have to have the seats, and you have to have them at an affordable price. And Hawaiian has, ever since the summer of last year, they've had terrific flight prices, and they continue to do a great job with their email marketing and their promotions in being out there in front to help to generate more demand.
What about the rates of the hotels that are reopening now? Are they better, the same, or lower than they were, say, pre-COVID?
Oh, I would venture to guess. Now, obviously it varies, but because of the fact that the hotels may be running 20, 30, 40%, but maybe last week, because of the Easter break and maybe another week ahead of us, they may be running significantly higher based on the inventory that they have available. But yeah, I would say that they are probably a good 15 to 25% lower than what they were at the same time in 19. You got to remember, in 2020, at this date, there were hotels that were already closed.
Yes.
Right. So really, the comparison really is against 2019. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a great time if you feel safe, if you're able to get a good flight. Now's a good time to travel to Hawaii because there are clearly bargains out there.
Yeah. Well, but in the period, say between March, April, when it really looked kind of drear, until say the end of last year, it seems to me, from my limited observation of this, that a lot of hotel owners, especially the ones who had deep pockets, I guess that would be the nationals and the internationals,
Right.
They took advantage of the time offline to renovate, improve, take steps. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Some clearly did. Although some of the bigger private equity companies that own the major brands, some of them were able to maybe reallocate some of their capital to the areas where they needed it most. But you have to remember, most of these larger investment companies were hit globally.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And not only, probably the sector that was hit one of the hardest was the hospitality sector. The hotels were hit globally, worldwide. So they were losing revenue and profits, across the board. So while it was a great time to maybe make improvements, the money wasn't there. So I think they were faced with some very difficult decisions. Of the capital that we do have, where do we feel that we should invest it where the market's going to come back the quickest? Or where do we feel that we can get the greatest return once the market comes back? You take the Halekulani. they already had renovation plans in the work. Apparently, their metrics presented an opportunity for them to say, rather than reopen October 15th, when I think the quarantine program came in, knowing that their market is predominantly Japanese, which was even more restrictive, right? So even if you were to come into Hawaii, you still have to quarantine for 10 or 14 days when you go back to Japan. So they probably said, our market's not coming back for a while. So let's take this 1 year or maybe even a little bit longer to do the renovation that we had planned, so that when the market comes back in Japan, maybe later this year, early next year, we will be fully renovated, ready to go, and have a dynamic property that they can enjoy. The Outrigger Group did the same with the Outrigger Reef, and I know that Blackstone had done the same thing with Turtle Bay. They were able to accelerate some of their renovations, and then they'll reopen sometime this summer, maybe June or July.
The name of the game, at least as far as I can see, for these hotels, is to demonstrate a little change, maybe a big change in the branding. And the state itself should be doing that. We are not only, beautiful with good weather and all the good things, we're also safe.
Right.
Why are we safe? Because we have taken step A, step B, step C, step D. Our properties are different. Our best practices are different. Staff training is different. All this stuff is different. So when you come here, you're going to be so impressed how safe you will be. Have they done that? Have they done that in the course of these? Have they done that in the reopening? But also, I'm wondering if they have modified the renovations that they planned earlier to include things that are, indicators of safety.
I don't know specific details on whether or not the Halekulani or the Reef or Turtle Bay or any of the other properties around the island have made any major modifications to their original renovation plans as a result of COVID. However, kind of to what you spoke of earlier, the national global brands with the great resources that they have came out very quickly with their own sanitation, cleanliness programs, their commitment to safety. Whether you're talking about Hilton's Clean Stay program or Marriott's commitment to excellence, or Hyatt's commitment to excellence, all the way down to Outrigger's sanitation program. I'll tell you the one that personally for me that impressed me quite a bit early on was the Prince Resorts in Hawaii. They came out with what they call their Prince Promise, and did a great job with the marketing aspect of it. Was able to present it to the stakeholders, the meeting planners, the travel agents, all the people that are involved in the reservation process. They were able to present that in a really easy to read, kind of a PDF book format, a flip book format. Mm-hmm. And it was great. It covered all the bases from hygiene to face-to-face contact. So yeah, they did a great job. And other organizations like Polynesian Culture Center, Kualoa Ranch, even the people who run the Pearl Harbor, the Maritime Museum, and some of those, I'm sure they've already developed their own protocols for safety as well. What may be missing is some of those smaller companies. And all they have is a bottle of hand cleaner.
It's not enough.
And they think that's enough. Whereas you go to some of the other restaurants, I can't recall the one I was at, but every time somebody left, the server came in, sprayed the table, sprayed the seats, and wiped it all before they allowed the next guest to come in. Quite frankly, you don't see that happening that often, right? And you hope more small businesses, whether it's retail shops or restaurants, will we'll take a closer and more serious view of that.
Yeah. You know, but you raise an interesting area of the ancillary economy around hospitality. I mean, restaurants, for example, they've been through their own crisis.
Yeah.
A lot of them
Terrible.
have folded. A lot of we have a show called Restaurants of Hawaii, and we talk about this all the time. And we talk to restaurateurs who had a fold, or who are on the brink of folding, and how they're trying to stay the course, and how they're trying to build for the future. In fact, some restaurateurs think this is a great time to open a restaurant right now. It's interesting. And then you have tour companies. I'm sure you've dealt with them over the years, and you know how very important they are as an ancillary use, an ancillary activity for any tourist. In fact, increasingly important. And some of them are local, some of them are from the mainland. But one thing is fundamental for all of them is, in the good times, they make a ton of money. They have a ton of jobs, and they keep tourists very happy. And they have suffered also if the hotels are closed.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they've suffered quite a bit, and I have been in contact with many of them over the course of the last year, and even now still do. Let's just take somebody like a JTB Hawaii. The premier Japanese travel company, where Hawaii is their biggest outbound from Japan destination, right? And I don't know how many people they brought in, but let's just say it was 300 to 400,000 out of the 1.3, 1.4 Japanese visitors that came in to Hawaii in 2019. JTB might have been involved in 300,000 or 400,000. And then their biggest competitor, a company called HIS, also did 300,000, 400,000. So now, they employed hundreds of people. They had their own transportation subsidiaries. They had their own retail subsidiaries. Now they have a handful of people working. So they've had to redeploy, right? Maybe send some people back to Japan, work at the home office, start getting ready for the Olympics and some of the other things. But yeah, it's affected a lot of them. And then even on the American side, companies like Pleasant Holidays, Classic Custom Vacations, Flight Center that brings in people from Australia and New Zealand, they've been devastated because Australia and New Zealand were some of the strictest international, countries that had the strictest international restrictions, that nobody could go out of the country, no one could come in the country. So that was a very, very thriving source market for Hawaii. And we hope it'll end up getting back to it sometime in the near future. But it was thriving. I mean, Australia and New Zealand seem to be breaking records every year for the last 4 or 5 years, and it came to a complete stop.
And one of the interesting things that I was watching early on was this whole thing about the quarantine. You mentioned it a little while ago, and at the beginning, and we went through so many combinations and permutations of exactly how we're going to do that. It didn't seem to settle down for a long time. At the beginning, it was a 2-week quarantine, and the remarkable thing about that is that the tourist would have to come here, go to his hotel, and theoretically sit in his hotel for 2 weeks.
Yeah. You wonder who would do that, right?
I remember Mufi Hahnemann was on a show. We were talking about that, and it's hard to believe. It's hard to believe that any tourist who pays good money to come here, airline, hotel, whatnot, and he looks out the window and he sees the waving palm trees and the beautiful ocean. He says, "I think I'll just stay here for 2 weeks." Most tourists don't stay that long anyway.
Right.
And then it evolved from that. Can you talk about that? Can you talk about how, in the reopening, obviously it's changed, and query, how do we get to a point where it's not a problem at all?
Well, kind of going back to what you said a little bit earlier, I'll share a conversation I had with an individual who's a executive with one of the larger American travel companies that bring people to Hawaii. The concern was early on that every island was different. Every island had their own little variation of the rule, right? Even in October 15, when you had that safe travel, that as long as you had the negative COVID test, you could come in, you didn't have to quarantine. Kauai must have changed 3 or 4 times what they were willing to accept or not accept, right? So yeah, it was very frustrating for them to be able to market in advance, because people that book a travel package with a travel company generally don't make a spur of the moment decision, right? You're planning pretty far in advance. Now clearly in these times, people plan a lot shorter in, but still, nevertheless, they want to know that, yes, I can go to Kauai or I can go to Maui when I put my deposit down. So that was extremely frustrating to them. So the recent move by the mayor of Kauai to be part of the state safe travel program, it must be music to their ears, because now it seems like everyone is pretty much on board. So, I hope it stays with the current program, that you can't come to Hawaii until you've had that negative test within 72 hours. And I hope that the city and counties do a better job of policing the mask mandates. I think that's where a lot of local residents have some concern, right?
Yeah.
Is that you walk around Waikiki, you walk around different places, and people are or they aren't wearing the mask, and for the most part, I think most local people are wearing the mask. So that's somewhat problematic.
Yeah. Well, I would like to talk with you about local people and about their reaction. Since statehood, at the time of statehood, I would say everybody went to Waikiki. There were things in Waikiki. There were restaurants and there was music and movies and all these things that were very attractive. And you could get there pretty easily. You could park there. It wasn't all that expensive. And little by little, the movie theaters closed down. Restaurants got more expensive. The parking was more difficult, and traffic down Kalakaua was really horrible. Yeah. And so a lot of people don't go there anymore. And the question is, and then you see also people who, including high profile people that say too many tourists. We have to dampen all of this, this part of the economy. We have to find other things instead, and we should not be incentivizing tourism. That could be a big mistake. And so this is a time for rethinking in many ways. It's certainly a time for the hotels to rethink how they're going to do business and how they're going to rebrand and re-renovate and all that. But it's also a time to rethink the relationship between the industry and the public, so that people don't say, I don't want any more tourists. And they say, I'll come, I'll enjoy, I'll be part of it. I'll be a feature in the landscape, because local people you have to have local people in the landscape. Right. You really do. Right. So what about that? Is that happening? Is it part of the future?
I'll tell you that is an interesting situation, Jay. And it's interesting, obviously pre-pandemic in 19, where the state welcomed its highest number of visitors at nearly 10.4 million. There are some challenges associated with that. I don't think anyone will say that the challenges were in Waikiki. Waikiki was built for that, right? Waikiki was built for that. But obviously the vacation ownership bill went into effect, and so that created some relief maybe for those residents on the North Shore and the Kailua area, where I have a home there as well. But yeah, what is that right number? I mean, we've throughout 18 and 19, you were hearing that. You were hearing, the House and the Senate tourism chairs talk about, we don't want 10 million. We can't keep growing at the rate we're growing. We'll be at 12 million in 3 or 4 years, and our infrastructure can't handle that. And everyone's crowding up all the available hiking spots and the Lanikai pillbox, and the beaches are crowded. That is going to be a very interesting challenge that we're all going to have to work towards, because the big money guys, the private equity companies, didn't buy and make their major investments in Hawaii to be limited to a certain volume of business, right? And especially with what they've experienced in 2020 and 2021, with the loss of revenue, the loss of profits, they want to come out with full guns blazing and get as many visitors at the highest possible rate that they possibly can. That's just the way they operate.
Especially after COVID, they want to make up for their losses during
absolutely.
COVID.
And it'll take them, who knows how long it'll take. I remember reading something that said after 9/11, it took, I don't know, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, whatever it was, before the rate got back to what it should have been if 9/11 didn't happen. Now, when 2008 happened, with the Great Recession, there was definitely a 1 or 2 year drop in revenue and profits and average rate for the hotels, but they quickly made it back starting 2010, 11, 12, all the way through 19. Clearly 2021, even 22 aren't going to be as robust. So it'll be interesting to see what steps will, and when you listen to what John DeFries at the Hawaii Tourism Authority is talking about, one of the reasons I think that he was put in the position was because obviously his Hawaiian background, but also his maybe more sensitivity to the local residents and being more mindful of not wanting to get that large quantity of visitors, but maybe looking at how we can get a higher quality of visitor and find that balancing point between what the residents of the state will be happy with, we can work with, and what the industry can can profit off as well. It'll be really interesting. And I don't know what that number is. We've heard numbers as low as 6.5 million to 8 million. But I just did some quick down and dirty math here. So in 2019, you had 10.4 million visitors. Now that equated to, and this is Hawaii HTA statistics, you had 90 million visitor days. 90 million visitor days. So if you took, instead of 10.4 million, you went down to 8.4 million. You took 2 million people off of that and divide that by 2, because usually 2 people stay in a room. Maybe you have 8 or 9 million less occupied room nights, right? And then you extrapolate that by what the average room rate was in 2019, which I think was like 197 or something like that. I think you're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.5 to $2 billion. And that's just the hotel side. Not to mention whatever else the visitor is spending on, the attractions, the food and beverage, the transportation. So, I think, obviously we're all going to be involved in it. But it'll be very interesting to see how things work out over the course of the next few years as we come out of the pandemic, of course.
One thought, John, is that, if you look back to the advent of the jet planes in the late 50s and start, sort of analyzing the development of the Hawaii hospitality tourism from there, it's really been an extraordinary run.
Mhm.
We didn't have all the talent then, and people had to learn on the job, uh, and we had this extraordinary workforce that knew the meaning of aloha. They knew how to make a tourist feel welcome and all that, and it drew people from all over the world, that special quality. And then, of course, there was the quality of the managers and the owners of these hotels. Lots of business transaction consolidations, mergers, lots of sales. We know how many
Mhm.
sales there have been, on
Yeah.
and on. But at the end of the day, it worked out pretty well. We have a highly efficient system.
Mhm.
It can handle 10, 12 million, not really a problem. I mean,
Yeah.
internally as an industry, it can provide all these services. It can make many people happy, and they come for that happiness. I mean, I know people have been coming to Hawaii based on their aspirations for a repetition of that happiness, for ah, since the 60s. Every
Yeah.
year they got to
Oh
come
yeah.
every year. And
Yeah.
so the question that in my mind is, I think we're at kind of an inflection point. The industry has done very well. People like have participated in making it a great industry globally.
Mhm.
What is going to happen in the future? Will it be able to handle all the challenges going forward? Will the same talent in management, in staffing, will that same talent be able to resurrect it after COVID in a way so that it will just continue as if there had been no COVID? Or will there be dramatic changes, constructive changes going forward?
I don't know. Good question. I mean, I'm obviously optimistic. So in answer to your question, will the industry figure it out, and do we have the talent on the islands, and that in the future that's going to be coming from other destinations like they have, for the last decades? Absolutely. Hawaii is someplace that people want to work at. If you're in the hospitality business, you want to work in Hawaii. You want, I mean, what greater place can you expect to work at in some of the great resorts on the neighbor islands? And then you've got something like the Hilton Hawaiian Village, one of the most profitable hotels in the world, and then you got the Sheraton Waikiki, the Hyatt Regency Waikiki. For many of these national brands, the Hawaii hotels are some of their flagship properties. So yes, we'll always get some top talent that's going to come in, and some of that top talent will stay with the brands, and some of them will come in with the brands, and then go out to some of the other hotels because they say, hey, I want to work on Maui, or I want to work at some of the other great resorts. So yeah, I think that mix of local talent and talent that comes in from national, international destinations will continue on. But there's a lot, and this would be a great subject for a future discussion, is the training of the local talent. Are we doing enough to make sure that our local talent is able to be groomed and get to that managerial level, and then make that big step up to the executive level? It doesn't always have to be somebody that's brought in from LA or San Francisco or some other state or country. And some hotels have done a terrific job with it. And some companies and other hotels haven't. So yeah, I'm very bullish and very optimistic that our industry is going to be able to figure out. Will there be changes as a result of COVID? Absolutely. But I think those changes are more um, hygiene related, right? Sanitation related. I, will we have to be more careful about hugging and kissing and giving the flower lei? Absolutely. So it'll be interesting to see how places like the Polynesian Culture Center and Paradise Cove Luau and the greeters at the airport, how they're able to share that aloha spirit, and giving the lei without also giving that kiss on the cheek.
We're going to invent all kinds of new things.
So maybe we can get, as a future guest, we'll get somebody from Roberts Transportation on who provide, a lot of the late greeting services, and maybe he or she can share some of their thoughts on how they're going to provide that aloha hospitality moving forward.
Well, just judging by this discussion today, John, there's a million issues out there.
Oh, yeah.
Issues that, that have to be addressed and resolved, and interesting people who can help us understand them, and things that the public should know about.
Mm-hmm.
This is the engine of our economy that's not going to change, and people should know how that works, know how it connects to them. So, John, I look forward to your show. I look forward to your subjects and guests going forward. I'm very excited to have you in our lineup, and I say welcome aboard.
So am I. Thank you, Jay. I'll tell you, my biggest challenge is, will we have enough time to interview all the people we want to interview?
It'd be a problem. Jon Conching, Hospitality Hawaii. Aloha, John. Thank you so much.